Hi, y'all. Welcome to Houston Latina Pulse. I'm Connie Leon, today's host, and we are at CC Network. And one of our goals for our podcast is to interview and highlight community members who are creating and building big things in Houston and are fully involved in our community. So today I'm interviewing Diana Rodriguez.
Hello. Hi.
And so we're going to start by learning a little bit about who she is and what she does. And Diana, are you ready for this?
Sure. Yeah. I'm just telling you who I am, right?
Yeah. So just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. A little bit about your background.
Okay.
So we want to know where you're from, a little bit of where you're from and your connection to Houston. And because I know you're not from here. So tell us a little bit about
that. So my name is Diana Rodriguez and I have been living in Houston for 22 years now. Mm-hmm. I was born in El Paso and then moved here when I was 12. My mom had a job opportunity and so we moved here. And a lot of people are like, oh, but you've been here for more than 20 years. Why do you not call yourself a Houstonian? And for me, the answer is always I know a lot of native Houstonians. And so I understand kind of the intimate connection to Houston.
The deep-rooted.
Yeah. And so it's a sign of respect of making sure that people know Houston is home to me, but I also was not origined here, not by choice, but for sure.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, it hurts having to admit it every time, but I've been here for about 22 years for sure.
Awesome. And then what is your background? So a little bit about where you're from, right? Well, you're from El Paso, but your background, culturally.
My family kind of structure.
Yes.
Yeah. So my mom is Mexican. Mm-hmm. She was born in Durango, Mexico. And as far as we know, we were actually talking about her cultural composition this morning. And she was talking about how we're basically Mexican and then a little bit of French, Italian, and a tiny bit of Spaniard.
Oh, that's so awesome.
So
did she do the 23andMe?
Got it. We had an uncle, one of her cousins did it. And so then she was like, well, I'm going to do it too. Oh. And so for me, it's kind of cool to be able to acknowledge my Mexican roots in terms of them originating there through my mother's side. And then my dad is actually Colombian, and he lives in Colombia right now. After he retired, he moved back to be with his mother. So on that side too, we're pretty origined from Colombia with a little bit of Italian ancestry and Venezuelan ancestry. So
I love that. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. And because I know you personally, you have one brother.
I do. I have an older brother, Danny. And I have a sister-in-law who he's married to, clearly. My sister-in-law, we actually grew up with her in El Paso. She is Venezuelan by cultural background, but we grew up in El Paso with her. And then they reconnected and got married. And so they have a daughter, my niece also. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the entirety of our little family.
That's awesome. I love it. And then, so education, what is your background education-wise? Mm-hmm. Again, because I know you personally already know all your answers, but let us know a little bit about that. Yeah. Because it has to do with what you're actually doing in the community now, what you're building.
No, it does. It had a huge kind of influence on where I am now. So when we moved to Houston, my mom's main goal was to kind of get an idea of the landscape as it related to education. And so we moved to Cypress from El Paso because they had a very good school district, or have, and it was affordable. It was within our price range. So we moved to Cypress, and immediately for me, it was a huge culture shock. Because in El Paso, it was 99.9% of the people are Latinos in one way or another, mostly Mexican. And so I remember walking into my first day of middle school in 7th grade, which also was September 11th, 2001.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And everyone was of a different ethnicities that I had never seen before. So people from the Middle East and from Asian cultures that I had never even heard of. And so for me, that was coming into such a diverse city. It really kind of set the tone for what I have really learned to love and appreciate about Houston, is just the extent of the diversity. But then I kind of grew really almost infatuated with living the idea of moving downtown as I got older. And so after I graduated from high school, I ended up moving closer to the city in the Montrose area and was just in love with all things downtown. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of, the other day I was thinking about it too. I set this idea of I'm going to go work downtown one day. But I ended up working downtown one day. But anyway, during that time, I also got an opportunity to start working through the JP courts, the Justice of the Peace courts. And I started working with youth who were at risk for misdemeanor criminal offense filings for failing to attend school. We call it truancy. And that was the first time that I really understood that what I had experienced in my little nook of Cypress was so far removed from not only like the cultural diversity of Houston, but also how system practices impact such a small populace of the people here.
Right.
So that was really impactful for me. And so I decided to, and the reason I went to go work at a courthouse was because my uncle asked me like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And my answer was retire. And so I was like, oh, he was like, go work for the government then. So I was like, okay, whatever. But it was just by chance. Like I didn't really know what I was doing there yet.
And you had just graduated from high school.
Yeah, I went to Sam Houston for a year, and then I wanted to be a primary school teacher, and I had to take a class that was like, learn how to teach little kids math. And like halfway through the semester, I was like, no, I'm not doing this. Like I love working with kids, but I don't know how to talk to them like they're 6. That's like a whole different skill set. If you're a pre-K teacher, like you deserve everything good in the world.
All the money.
All of the money and all of everything. So so when I came back to Houston, it was kind of like navigating, what do I want to do now? I, at that time, still knew I loved teaching and knew that like I wanted to do something community invested because I had been so intentional about surrounding myself with community in the way that it's truly represented in Houston.
Right.
Yeah. So I kind of ended up by chance at the courthouse working in that criminal division. And it kind of sparked this, like, I know what I want to go back to school for. So I graduated from the University of Houston downtown with my bachelor's in criminal justice, and then ended up going back to get my master's there as well. And so during that time, I was really just learning, you know, how to be resourceful in terms of like what's out there in the community that families need, and then how to like offer those services to families who need them in a way that like still holds the system accountable, right? So like not overwhelming families, understanding like what the actual composition of the city of Houston looks like. So are they actually accessible? How much time do they need to go through the process of enrolling in those resources? Like, are they feasible, et cetera?
Right.
And then advocating for the families who kind of were being ordered to do certain things and being able to stand in a courtroom and let it be known, like, this is unreasonable.
That was through your job.
That was through my job.
Okay, through your job. And then the combination of what you were learning in school, it all made sense at that point.
Right. So yeah, the motivation was to go back to school and know what intention I wanted to go with was because of what I had kind of noticed in the courtroom.
Right.
And then what I learned through my educational setting prepared me to advocate for those families, right? Like understanding that this is actually the 50th year since we enacted the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Act. And that was something that was intended to decriminalize delinquent behavior and acknowledge that kids have a different cognitive capacity, right? And so I kind of just would ruminate in this like, wait, but my school is telling me that we're doing things to try and help families in a way that doesn't criminalize them. But then I'm going into courtrooms and kind of like, well, where is that?
The opposite.
Yeah. And not
or
intentionally.
Nothing, right.
Like it's just, I think in my humble opinion, right, it was just lacking, right? It was just not enough.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like it's either not there or something that isn't making sense for that population isn't in place. And it's crazy because like we have a lot of commonality. So my kids are in Cypress. They go to school there. And yes, it is one of the better school districts right now. So I'm always advocating for them and making sure that they're good in that space because it's so important. Yeah. As young kids of color, like it's very important to have that advocacy behind you. As a parent, very important. As like an educator. But yeah, so I love that. And then the other thing is I grew up in the Valley. I grew up in South Texas. And what you're saying about like the cultures in Houston, it is a culture shock because I grew up between Houston and the Valley, but there still wasn't that cultural infusion in South Texas. Right. And I would come to Houston and see everything and I'd be like, no, this is not right. Like what it's another world, right? Yeah. So it's awesome to like hear it because everybody kind of experiences it. So your background, where you grew up and how you grew up, and then your education, that first kind of job that you had after you graduated high school, have kind of led you to where you are. And it's how we met, right? Through programming for entrepreneurship, because that's what I do in my full-time job. And I met you at a center that was running and operating through those same programming styles and format. And so with that, now you're creating something on your own, which I know is really exciting because I've kind of been there through some of those steps and I'm loving seeing how it's all coming together. So can you tell us a little bit about that, the program that you're trying to build, the company that you're building, and kind of where you are with that?
Yeah. So earlier this year, I decided to formally create Tethered Labs is the company name. So Tethered Labs LLC. I have an LLC now. And so that kind of happened because I went to school, I learned all these things, and it still kind of, I came back to the same question of like, why are we waiting until kids are system impacted to do something about it? Everything in research, literature, programmed analysis, everything is telling us that we are waiting way too long, right? And we've struggled to historically find good support for longevity of programs that start very early on, like Head Start. And so ultimately, I got to a point where I realized that like, if instead of asking the question, I should be answering it. And so Tethered Labs is what we're structured to do. We have gone through pilot programming and had some really good preliminary results that have been presented on a national scale. It's produced some publication. And so our efforts are completely intended to restructure educational and workforce development solutions so that kids have, like I was talking about earlier, like realistic accessibility to future success.
And just a good foundation or a different foundation than they're used to kind of reestablish that.
Right. Well, and to establish it as like the starting point is something that for me has really stuck in my mind as I've kind of been developing Tethered Labs, is that when we talk about systems, right, and how to do it better, we're constantly talking about reform. Reform is like the standard of approach. But for me, after so much of like understanding economics, public policy, right, I'm still kind of figuring out where I'm going to finish my PhD program, but I've done a lot of research at this point. Understanding these different dynamics, it's kind of like the word reform is exactly what it is. You take a jigsaw puzzle and then you figure out how to do it differently. But the reality is like those jigsaw pieces, it doesn't matter if you start from a corner or the middle, is going to make the exact same picture. So we're very intentional about saying restructure. So for us, that means, for example, in primary schools, eliminating the practice of punishment. There's no actual need to punish children at that level. So it's setting up that stage for like not even necessarily like creating a change in their life, but setting the standard of having opportunity throughout the rest of their life.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I love talking to Diana, y'all, because she's so freaking smart. And every time you say something, I'm like, oh my God, I learn something new every time. And so where are you now in the process of building your company? Like, what is it that you are going to do moving forward?
Yeah. So I say we all the time. At this point, it's me and my wonderful like friendships and network that
you have a team. You have a support around
like
you that is helping you in some way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we're continuing to look for that. So like I mentioned, the primary kind of scaling that we're doing, we're looking for, primary school campuses that are ready to implement restructure change. So rather that be by charter or by public school, we're looking for an active partner that's ready to, either this fall or next spring, launch a full curriculum that is that removes suspension and expulsion policies. And we guide them through that and provide all of the background research, et cetera. But yeah.
How easy or how hard is that going to be for you?
I think that and I think you can relate to this, and most people can. It's like when you make a decision about you're going to do something, then the difficulty is removed, right? Then it just becomes a matter of like focus and dedication. So we don't really see this as something that will be difficult. It's just something that requires for that campus or that district to decide, you know what, the research is there. The findings are there. The youth development knowledge of psychology is there. Let's just do it.
It's a matter of implementation.
It's a matter of implementation. Right? And like I said, we've piloted concepts well enough to know that we can do the training, implementation, follow-up, and continued research to do it.
And then the success rate and the outcomes of it afterwards.
Right. And we're still focused on, right, as a company, we understand we still have to focus on like the bottom line, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're ready and prepared to understand how TEA policies, et cetera, lend to that so that we can make sure that the focus is still having some type of like fiscal effect on not just the school or the district, but the community that surrounds it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a lot. You're doing a lot.
It's needed, right? Yeah. And so, we were talking about at the HCC, the business leadership class last week. It's like, what does that motivation come from? And it's just the awareness of need, right? Like, I would love to be the kind of person that's like, oh, there's a need. Let's just kind of do it. And I feel like for me, the difficulty has been recognizing that for the last 12 years, I have kind of just been doing it. But now I feel like I'm just in a place where it's like, okay, I can't ignore it anymore. Again, like I can't ask the question. I'm going to have to give the answer now.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
So that, of course, is always so interesting. And I love listening to you talk about it. And definitely will connect people with like your website and how they can connect with you. Something else that we wanted to talk about that is, and I told you this, you're so smart and you're such a good friend. And we want to talk a little bit about Pride, right? Yeah. We're in June. And so Pride, what does June and Pride mean to you? You're like, fellow UFO, zoom in, please.
Yesterday. Is that really happening? I don't know. That's actually happening. There it is.
We'll make it happen.
Yeah. I mean, Pride means a lot. Yesterday, I actually was fortunate enough. I'm part of a collaborative space that's empowering small business owners, specifically focusing on women that are Black and Brown communities, called the US Space. And so Legina Harris, who's the founder of the US Space. We know Legina. Everybody knows Legina. But Legina invited me to go to the Houston LGBT Chamber of Commerce Pride in Business Luncheon. So we got to do that. That's where I got my UFO pin.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and that's just one of the events that I feel like have just, the city of Houston has done such an incredible job as a community of like really celebrating Pride for the entire month, right? Mm-hmm. And I was joking with one of the people that I made friends with yesterday that we were like, I feel like the gay community is just out there like trying to bank this energy, because the reality is that once we kind of step out of these safe spaces, it just doesn't always it just doesn't always transfer, right? And so for me, Pride, I actually didn't come out to my family until I was 26. I'm 34 now. And so for me, Pride is just like that wild acceptance, right? Yeah. Like it's a community of people who are just like, you will never feel excluded. And you don't have to be gay.
Don't make me cry.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm a huge cry. But and asking me these questions in the month of June, like ask me in October.
It has to happen. Ask me in October. Ask me at Christmas time.
Ask me at Christmas time. When we get like, I don't know. I'm just like, yeah, we're happy. No, but it really is just such like, it's such an organized community in the city of Houston, but it's also one that like doesn't disacknowledge or doesn't like lack acknowledgement that there's only some of us who can feel this way all of the time. Yeah. Right. And so it's just a community full of like compassion and joy and just like excitement for being out.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the only place that like I've just never felt excluded. And so Pride is a really big deal. I'm excited to keep celebrating. I've also felt very fortunate to have so many people who are not necessarily identifying as queer or on the queer kind of spectrum. But that have like, they're the ones who are sending, you send me memes like every other day, right? Like so many of my hetero
You reminded us that we had to start June 1st to celebrate you.
June 1st is coming. Everyone prepare. I don't need any excuses.
And we did. I was ready.
Yes. Yeah. And it's been kind of something that I feel very, very lucky about, right? I have a lot of hetero relationship normative friends that are like constantly just like, hey, how gay do you feel today? And I'm like, very extra. It's wonderful.
And to have that advocacy, and it just goes back to everything else that you're doing, right? And as a parent, my kids, have not said that they're gay, but if they ever did, I know that as a parent and being like first gen Mexican American, I would fully support them in every space. And knowing people your age who have struggled with that, it puts me in a place where I definitely want to be supportive and understanding in every area in every way, because I don't think that my parents would have been so supportive, right? If one of my siblings or myself would have made that statement at any point that, we're coming out or we're gay. And so it's a big, big deal, right? For my kids, my kids, they know, right? They just know that it's who you are. And
they don't even, it doesn't even seem like something that's outside of anything but normal for them. And I applaud you for that, because it's nice to be around families like that.
And for us, it's very normal, right? I have a cousin who is trans, and they've known him their whole lives. Right. And before he transitioned, he would always call himself a tonkle, right? Yeah. Their gay uncle. And so, he was always that person for them. And so they don't know him as anybody else other than their uncle. Mm-hmm. And when he became trans, my kids were the very first kids to tell you, or the very first people in our house to be like, that's not his name anymore. Yeah. His name is this, and he's a he. So get it right. So definitely the advocacy in that space is so important. And here in Houston, again, just being such a diverse city and having that safe space for you, I know is such a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about 8 years since I've been entirely out, right? So I'm still learning kind of at every different setting. Mm-hmm. There's times that I'm still kind of oh, this is the first time I've done this. What is the reaction going to be? Rather it be around family or old friends or different neighborhoods, different cities, right? I drove to, where'd I go? Nashville, Tennessee earlier this year. I made a couple stops in East Texas. That was weird. And then I camped by myself in Arkansas. I was like, what's this going to be like? And so these are things that are just kind of constantly, I think, for most of us, right, in the back of our heads. And for people my age who are still potentially even still closeted or who have recently come out, it's also kind of having space to find the authentic you, right? That's not something that you learn overnight, but most people, they have a lifetime to kind of figure that out. And I think something that I've become more in tune in is I know who I am, but what is the full extent of that, right? And so I'm I sometimes I feel like an 8-year-old who's still kind of trying to figure out my place, right? Yeah.
And allowing yourself to be who you are, right? Because I know we have a lot of conversations around that of just being yourself.
Right.
And you're right. For me, even as a straight woman, I didn't really become who I am or feel like I was who I am until later in life after my divorce, right? After 37 is when I was like, oh, this is who I am, and figuring that out and becoming really comfortable in that space, and then not caring, being very unapologetic about it has been one of my biggest things, right? And yeah, I mean, I don't know how difficult it would be for you, right? To try to figure that out. And then to try to, come out, it's just so much and so overwhelming. So I can't even think about it.
I will say though, if I can, I think it's just so admirable to see people who are just so fierce in their authenticity from the queer community, who it's the realization, of course, there's so many queer, people in the city of Houston and around the world. It's because they have to fight from such a developmental, such a deep level of authenticity that for them to be able to forge that path for themselves, it's well, what's building a business or becoming a millionaire, doing real estate, it's nothing, because they have been able to, I just truly admire that in a lot of people in the queer community that are just this, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. But from such an early on stage, of course they're successful.
And it's crazy because that's the difficult part of their lives, and it shouldn't be, right?
Right.
That becoming a millionaire is easier than coming out. That is insane to me. I just can't think about it like that. And it's hard. So one of my last questions, what do you hope to see more of in our community moving forward?
See, and I knew it was the last one, but it was I think
I forget about the last question all the time.
Yeah. I think just acknowledgement, right? The city of Houston has such a capacity to make a statement, a very bold statement. And we've done it over and over and over again, right? Specific to Pride after, the Orlando Pulse shooting. Alan Rosen was this, we're going to host Pride and we're going to do it. There was no fear, right? Alan Rosen was there were cops everywhere, but just there to make us feel safe. I never forget that Pride. I was there is a lot of police here, but Pride was Pride. It didn't really change in terms of how we experienced it. But I think that there's just so much more potential for the city of Houston to get on the same page and make those same statements, right? let's not just acknowledge kind of where the desperate pockets of our city are, but like truly look back on not reform, right? Restructure. Reform is going to build that same puzzle. So like truly make statements of restructuring the city of Houston in ways that like by research practices and policy, restructure the city of Houston to minimize those desperate sections and really like build community together, acknowledging the vast diversity that we have here, whether it be through trans communities or just Black communities, Latino communities, Asian communities. Like we can run the gamut. And I truly believe that the city of Houston can make a very loud statement by doing that.
And building that action, doing those actionable items that are going to create that for everybody in Houston.
What we call equity in action.
Yes.
The city of Houston has such a capacity to build or restructure through equity in action. So I guess my call to action would be that, right? Like what do we need to do so that, you know, the city of Houston can be known for being one that is of equity in action.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're going to run for office, right?
No. No. Yeah, no. No.
Because that would be really awesome.
Yeah.
Diana for mayor. That's all of my questions, but thank you so much. This was such a good opportunity to get to interview you and for others to know you. I know you on this level and I know you personally, professionally.
Yeah.
And it's just awesome. So I am so excited to be able to share that with a lot of people. Is there anything else that you want to just kind of let us know or tell us about that we maybe didn't cover?
No, I mean, thank you for inviting me to do this in the month of June. Okay, June. But also for people who are curious about our restructure plan or want to see kind of the preliminary findings of our pilot programming or get links to some of the research that's tagged, read the blogs that kind of tells you more about community research, restorative justice research, and then economic research. There's like a blog there that I've been posting information from different resources and studies.
And what's your website?
And the website is tetheredlabs.io.
Okay.
So it's TETHEREDLABS.io.
That's a lot of letters.
It's tetheredlabs.io. I'll link it to my Instagram too.
You can. You can link it.
Diana _RDZ _HTX. I know how to link websites. I'm not super.
You're so funny. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you guys for watching and listening to us today. Bye.